This is a timeline up at the top. This is where, like for instance, if you go down here, you got your scene timeline, components, controller, etc., etc. And the timeline assets get controlled up here. Each one of these objects that's pertinent in the control scheme gets a playable director, and the timeline asset goes into that. And then when the timeline is played during runtime, it goes over that and plays whatever is stored in each one of those timeline assets. Now, under the track editor window, I've got a suite of 3 editor windows. First one we'll go over is the track editor window, which basically shows you all of the objects. Right now, you'll see when you first open it that it's empty. All right, so you go down here, we have a save track assignments and a load track assignments, which if you've already got your configurations, etc. But basically, they're by default, they're configured the way that they should be. You may want them set up different after, but they can be worked with. So we go get all tracks for assignment. It's going to troll through all the scene, and it's going to try and identify all of the objects that have tracks to them. And then it'll show them under the track objects as a name and then an identifying matching index list of the track objects themselves. So see, you got boom jib over here, and then the boom jib controller. You got your DMX spotlights. You got your EL wire rigs, which are for each one of the rigs. So you've got those at the top. So now that we've got those, we'll close those lists down. And then here we've got the control out track assignments, which took the lists up here and it organized them. So right now they're listed as types. And so it'll show you in the first column the scene object's name. If it has a servo controller, etc., etc., it'll be up at the top. If it's got servo IDs, they'll be right here. Then we've got the DMX spotlights here with each one of the channels. You got the DMX channels and the DMX channel names, the channel that they're going to come out on. You got signal ranges, minimum signal, maximum signal, default signal, and the current signal, which is that. Then we've got a key color, which you can use if you want. And here we've got the playables. So we've got the playable director and the timeline asset that's loaded into it. Over here, whether there's signal emitters and a signal receiver. Basically, if something's supposed to work along the timeline, we'll find that it has a signal receiver. So when we get down to the master IK rigs, because even though the master IK rig runs into the puppeteer and controls the puppeteer, and the puppeteer sends the servo rotations forward, the master IK rig is the one that you're going to animate. The other ones are kind of proxies follow that. So the same down here, you got your puppeteer rigs, and they got signal receivers as well. So that's basically how that works. It's basically so that you can look across and see what's going on with each one of the items, whether they got a signal out or not under this column, what they're being used for, capstan pulley, puppeteer, whether they're in the signal chain for the control type, whether they're using a COM port or not, audio out, not signal chain, scene spotlights, etc., etc. So we'll close that up and we'll go to the next part, which is the Playables Group Editor. What the Playables Group Editor start off with, say there was none at all. So say we'll just clear this collection. Then we're going to group the track assignments by type. And now we have the control out track assignments here, and they're grouped by type, basically how they were grouped up above. You can see their signal ranges, etc., etc. So we can also group the track assignments by signal chain so that we can follow what's going on with rig 1, rig 2, rig 3, rig 4, and rig 5 as far as each one of the components that are involved in its performance. So we'll just take a look at rig 1 to see how that goes out. So you got the master IK rig, which the puppeteer rig follows with a robotics IK system. Then you got the boom jib, which follows the puppeteer. Then you've got your scene spotlight. This is the actual in-scene Unity spotlight. And then you've got the DMX spotlight, which is basically your signal out. It takes its cue it reads the rotation on the X and Y axis of the spotlight in the virtual scene and feeds it to the scene stage DMX controller so it knows what color, etc., etc. The colors can be set here, and that's a second set of control out. Then you've got below that, we've got the serial ports editor. So we have a way to save a serial ports config and load a serial ports config. When you first open it, it'll basically be blank. So you hit that and it'll look for serial ports. Right now I'm only getting serial port COM1. Its baud rate is set at 115, 200 per second. Ports not open, and I'm using it for, you can either use it for DMX, animatronics, or mocap in. So down here you got puppeteer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the COM port signal outs that you want. You can do that, and once you're done, you do your save serial ports config, and you can load your serial ports config next time, so you can change it. When you're done with all that and you're happy with it, you can update the scene serial port controller from editor settings, which is a runtime serial port controller that allows you to switch up serial ports, etc., etc., on the fly during runtime. So up here you'll have your port name, your baud rate, etc. This is the serial port object, and here's the serial port controller, and they're both part of the runtime user interface. So then here you can as I said, you can update the serial port controller from the editor settings. Next we got the DMX Light Groups editor, and if these aren't populated, of course you can go get spotlight controllers, get LED strip, get the EL wires, get the DMX socket out. You can also get the get UI channel assignment components. You can also, let's take a look at these. So we got channels out, etc. You'll notice that they've got the DMX channels out set properly for these, but we got a repetition of these channels. So what you do is you assign sequential channel numbers to all DMX lights. And if you notice, that'll go through 49, 50, 51, 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, right? And then you go down to the EL wires, and you go 77, 78, and it'll tell you the scene object name, EL wire 01 brain of rig 01, and then it'll show you where the EL wire controller's at, which is not directly on the rig because of the way that I had to control them, but most assuredly they're there. And then you got your DMX sockets out. I'm gonna have to hook that up. So when you're done with all that, you can update your scene lighting controllers to editor settings, or update the editor settings to scene lighting controllers. And finally, the last part of the thing, we got the actors, we got the serial ports out, we got the lighting set up. Now this is the audio control group editor. Under here we got a list of all audio sources. We got the type that it's handling, such as rig Foley and rig lip sync for Puppeteer 1, same for each one of the others. Then we've got a scene Foley, which is like sound effects for the main scene. And after that we've got the music score. Then this reads the volumes for each one of these. You can set the volumes en masse by just changing all these and hitting the refresh audio sources settings list. You can choose the spatial blend 2D to 3D. It's probably better to leave it at 3D because then you can use the stereo sound field to make it sound like it's actually coming from the object itself instead of from the stereo speakers. The pan stereo, of course, leaving it in the center. There might be reasons where you want to channel something totally left or totally right or put it off center. But basically the spatial blend 3D will handle the stereo panning for you as far as putting something in the scene in a position in the sound field that simulates its actual position. And then we've got all the current clips that the audio sources are playing, so you can look at that at any time and see by hitting audio, the refresh audio sources setting list. And then you got play on awake, which generally you're going to want to do, and because you're going to control the audio source along the timeline. So you may have one audio source as a whole soundtrack, or you may have a bunch of special effects tracks that you set up along the timeline at the appropriate places to play special effects on. And then we've got whether you should loop the audio or not. So you may want to have like a scene music score that's a loop, and you just want that to keep going in the background as a band. And if not, click that off, and you can have one symphony followed by the next rock tune, by the next metal tune, by the next barbershop quartet, whatever. So if you want to find all the audio clips in the project, you hit that, and then with any of these, you can go copy and paste. And so you can copy and paste between the audio clips here and the current clips that are being played down there. So that'll handle that. And again, when you're finished with everything that you want to do, you can update the scene audio sources to the editor settings. If you don't want to do that, then they'll remain as they were. Bang. And so that's the story. So Next up, we've got the Scene Timeline Assets window. This is basically, it gives you a list of all playable directors and allows you to create new sets of timeline assets per scene. The idea being that you create a number of scenes so you could control them granularly. Then when you're finished, you take that and you sequence them one after the other. And that'll allow you to create a show from a sequence of scenes. So here's how it works. Start off with, you got the load default assets up here. You've got the pre-selected path and the assets folder. Those can't be edited, and they shouldn't be edited because we use those to find all these assets. So say we were going to clear these collections out, or you open this and they happen to be empty, you could just go load default assets and you've got a full set of the timeline assets, their names, and their associated playable directors. So you'll see that these are empty because we haven't created anything right now. So let's create a new set of timeline assets, and we'll call the first one test. And then we'll go down and look over here. All your pertinent, we have a set of default timeline assets here. And these are basically all the original timelines that we use to duplicate when we're making scene sequences. So they'll just duplicate the names and create a new one without any of the information, the signals or the animation tracks, etc. that'll be on the original. And so down in this window here, we've already called it test. So we're going to go down here and we're going to create a new timeline asset set, which will take test, put that as a prefix with an underscore, and then name them all appropriately. Now that they're all made, we'll take those and we'll take one of the objects here, go down to the bottom, and we'll show you how. Right now, we'll clear this. It has 103 items in it. And if you notice down here, it's the default because it doesn't have anything with an underscore over here in the playable directors. So we'll load the new scene timeline to the playable directors, and it'll do it to all 103 of the playable directors. And you can choose a wrap mode here. You can do a loop or a hold at the end, or you could choose none where it just trails out, and that's it. So let's create another one here. We'll call this scene 001. You can name them whatever you want, but it's helpful to put a number after so that you know that that's the first and second and third in the sequence, etc. So we'll create another new timeline asset set. When it's finished doing that, we'll have a new set up top. You'll see that they're prefixed with the name Scene 001. And so we've done that. We'll load the new scene timelines to the playable directors. You'll see that it's done that. So now you got a fresh timeline asset on there that you can go up into the timeline itself and add signals along and control what's going on in that scene. So it makes it easy for you. Then you can get all the timeline assets, and it'll show you the asset directories and the scene set names up here. Then you can, at the bottom here, if you got a number of scenes up here and you choose to go back and tweak one, or you've all pre-made them already and you want to go in and start configuring the timelines for each one of the scenes, you can choose one of these sets of assets here, say the test timeline assets, and then you can load the selected timeline asset set to the playable director by clicking the buttons. And then you can go up here and get all the playable directors, get current scene timeline, and then the next thing that we're going to do, now that we've created all that, we're trying to control the scene's jukebox controller over here. So we'll dock this editor window in with the other one right here. And then we go up under the track editor window and we get the scene jukebox editor. The scene jukebox editor, first we'll get the scene timeline directories, and then we'll choose a sequence. So say we want to do it in a different order. Say we want scene 1, add selected scene to sequence, then you will go to default, add selected scene to sequence, then we'll select the third, we'll select test, we'll add selected scene to sequence. Now that we've done that and we have the sequence in the order that we want, we're going to load the selected scene sequence to the jukebox, scene jukebox sequencer. So we've done that, and as you can see, we get the scene sequence up here, matches that over there. We get the scene timeline asset set directory so that we know where to find things. And here we have a list of lists. So here's like the first scene, and you go through second scene in the sequence, you go through third scene, go through. All your playable directors are here. If that list is empty, you can always get them again just by hitting that button, and you'll see it's populated again. Clear it. Get playable directors. And then you can get the current scene timeline assets by checking the number up here, the current scene index. Let's get scene 1, for example, and we'll get the current scene timeline assets. And as you can see, it's got the default ones. So let's change the number up there. Let's change it to 0, and that list will change to the scene 1, which is the first one in the sequence, which is number 0, because our indexes always start at 0, not 1. It's the way machines work. So that's basically the working of the scene jukebox editor. And the scene create new scene timeline assets, which kind of work as a suite of tools together. So what you use them for is you create your scenes over here. They'll point the directories. The directories will be loaded down here. For instance, you see you got all the scene 1 timeline assets down here, made at the click of a button. You got the test timeline assets, same thing, all made at the click of a button, ready for you to go. So that's the nature of that beast.